Hey everyone, I'm on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I'd love your help to get there. If you're enjoying the content, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the family.
It finally happened. The moment everyone in Cleveland pretended would never come. The one you could feel building for weeks, maybe months beneath the surface. A tension so thick it clung to every practice, every press conference, every fake smile during team photos. Thursday afternoon, it all detonated. The sun over Berea burned hot, the kind of heat that makes tempers shorter and patience thinner. Helmets clashed, whistles echoed, but all of it faded when number 7, Shedeur Sanders, the face of the franchise, the kid they called the future, suddenly stopped moving. His jaw was locked tight. His gloves hung at his sides. And when the coaches barked the next play, he didn't even look their way. Something broke in that moment. What happened next felt less like football practice and more like a full-blown organizational collapse. Teammates froze mid-drill. Position coaches traded nervous glances. A silence swept across the field that felt heavier than any hit. The kind of silence that says, "This is bad." Within seconds, voices rose. Not the usual coaching noise, something sharper. Sanders walked toward the sideline, his eyes locked on offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt. Words were exchanged, short, clipped, not for cameras, but the tone said everything. Then came head coach Kevin Stefanski, moving in fast, trying to contain it. Too late. The situation wasn't a spark anymore, it was wildfire. Witnesses say Sanders' face was unreadable, fury layered over heartbreak. He tried to talk, to understand why he was being sidelined during 11-on-11s, why Dillon Gabriel was suddenly taking the reps that were supposed to be his. But Stefanski's answer landed like a hammer. "You're a distraction. Leave the field." And just like that, the Browns' would-be savior was walking off the practice field, helmet in hand, body stiff with disbelief. No shouting, no drama, just that walk. That silent, burning walk that told everyone watching that something inside the Cleveland Browns had snapped in half. Reporters didn't need official statements. The story wrote itself in real time. Players stared but said nothing. No one chased him down. No one defended him. It was the kind of moment you can't stage or spin, the raw, unscripted collapse of trust between a quarterback and the men supposed to believe in him. By the time Shedeur disappeared into the tunnel, the damage was done. The locker room would never be the same. The coaches knew it. The front office knew it. Everyone in that facility could feel the weight of what they just witnessed. And here's the part nobody's admitting yet. This wasn't just a bad day at camp. It was the explosion everyone predicted, and nobody stopped. Because in Cleveland, it's never just about football. It's about power, pride, and the silent battles that destroy teams from the inside. And this battle? It just went nuclear. But to understand how it got this bad, you have to rewind to where the cracks first began forming. To outsiders, Thursday looked like a sudden outburst, an immature reaction from a frustrated rookie. But inside the Browns facility, people knew better. This wasn't random. This was inevitable. It started quietly, almost invisibly, the kind of tension that builds in whispers. The quarterback rotation, something fans assumed was fair, had slowly become a public charade. Coaches preached competition, but anyone watching practice long enough could see the truth. Shedeur Sanders wasn't being given a fair shot. For days, he'd stood on the sideline while Dillon Gabriel, a fifth-round pick with nowhere near the hype, ran first-team reps. Every time the offense huddled, every time the whistle blew, Gabriel was there. And Shedeur left to run scout team drills against the backups, throwing routes to receivers who might not even make the roster. That's where the frustration began, not in a single argument, but in a slow burn of disrespect disguised as coaching strategy. And when it came to a head during those 11-on-11 situational drills, all that pressure finally had somewhere to go. The play call was routine, third down conversions, end-of-drive scenarios, but something about that period broke the illusion. Shedeur was watching yet another first-team rep go to Gabriel, even as the offense stumbled through incomplete passes and blown assignments. He'd been patient for weeks, biting his tongue through every "we'll talk later" from the staff. But this time, He didn't walk away.
Between drills, Shedeur approached offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt. Eyewitnesses said he wasn't yelling, not at first, he just wanted clarity. Why were the reps being split unevenly? Why wasn't he being allowed to compete the way he'd been promised on draft night? Van Pelt gave the kind of answer that ends careers. Vague, dismissive, corporate. Something about coaching decisions and rotation strategy. Translation, "You're not our guy." That's when the tone shifted. Shedeur's voice got sharper. His body language said everything. He wasn't trying to start a scene, but the emotion was impossible to hide. That's when Kevin Stefanski stepped in, not to listen, but to shut it down. He pulled Shedeur aside near the practice field perimeter. What started as a conversation became an argument, voices rising, gestures animated. Coaches pretended to stay focused, but every pair of eyes was locked on that exchange. Then came the words that detonated the situation. Stefanski told him his attitude was becoming a distraction, that questioning authority was undermining team structure, that if he couldn't get in line, he could leave the field. You could have heard a pin drop. For Shedeur Sanders, a kid raised around football royalty, trained to compete through adversity, it wasn't just an insult, it was betrayal. He didn't yell back, didn't plead his case. He just stared for a second, the kind of stare that says, "You'll regret this," then turned and walked. Helmet in one hand, eyes forward, every step echoing through that silent practice field. Players froze. A few receivers started to move, maybe to stop him, but no one did. Nobody said a word. Nobody challenged the decision. Because in that building, fear outweighs loyalty. And just like that, Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback Cleveland had sold as its future, became a symbol of everything wrong with the franchise. The spark had finally hit the powder. And by the time the story left the facility, it wasn't just a practice incident anymore. It was a crisis. But to understand why that spark exploded the way it did, you need to know how deep the cracks already ran inside Cleveland's walls. Long before that Thursday afternoon, the Browns were already splitting apart. The confrontation on the field wasn't the beginning, it was the inevitable result of weeks of quiet manipulation. From the moment Shedeur Sanders arrived in Cleveland, the script had already been written. He just didn't know it yet. When he was drafted, ownership called it a new era, a bold pick, a cultural shift, a quarterback with star power, composure, and the charisma to carry a franchise still haunted by its past. The cameras loved it. The fans believed it. But behind closed doors, the reaction was colder. Inside the coaching offices, not everyone shared the excitement. While owner Jimmy Haslam publicly called Shedeur the future, head coach Kevin Stefanski and parts of his staff were quietly skeptical. To them, Sanders wasn't a fresh start. He was a headline, a distraction, a player who came with more cameras than completions, more media than mentorship. And when a coaching staff already feels their authority slipping, the last thing they want is a quarterback who draws more attention than they do. That's where the divide began. One side, ownership and marketing, saw Shedeur as an opportunity, a player who could put Cleveland back on the map, both on the field and off it. The other side, the football purists inside the building, saw him as a risk. They wanted a controllable, conventional rookie, someone quiet, coachable, system first, someone like Dylan Gabriel. And from that moment, everything that happened next started to make sense. The competition wasn't competition at all. It was choreography, carefully managed to protect the illusion of fairness while slowly isolating Shedeur from any real chance to win the job.
The little signs were everywhere. Van Pelt would meet privately with Gabriel after drills, but not with Shedeur. The playbook updates went out unevenly. Certain packages, certain adjustments, mysteriously missing from Sanders' tablet. Team meetings became colder.
conversations shorter, compliments replaced with criticism disguised as coaching. At first, he shrugged it off. He'd been doubted before, in high school, in college, even on draft night. But this time was different. This wasn't outside noise. This was his own team setting the stage for his downfall. And make no mistake, everyone in that building could feel it. Receivers whispered about strange rotations. Offensive linemen quietly admitted they didn't understand why Gabriel was running first-team drills when Sanders' timing was sharper. Even defensive coaches, the ones with no stake in the quarterback battle, started questioning whether something deeper was going on. Yet, no one spoke up. Because in Cleveland, the unwritten rule is survival. Challenge authority and you're next. So they watched the divide widen, week after week, while the locker room's foundation slowly crumbled beneath them. By the time the media started asking questions, the internal damage was already irreversible. Shedeur Sanders had become the outsider in his own team, the chosen one turned outcast. The player who represented the owner's vision, punished by the coach who saw him as interference. That's why when Thursday's confrontation erupted, nobody was surprised. Not really. They'd seen it coming. They just didn't think it would happen in public. Because once you understand the setup, the meltdown doesn't look like a tantrum. It looks like a trap. And now that the trap's been sprung, the fallout is spreading, far beyond the field, far beyond the team. Because when a quarterback walks off the practice field in front of the world, it's not just a story, it's a message. And Cleveland's message was loud and clear. This team doesn't just have problems, it has enemies within. But that's just the start. Because when the story hit the internet, everything changed. The silence inside the building was nothing compared to the storm that followed online. By the time Shedeur Sanders reached the locker room, the world already knew. Someone at practice had their phone out. One photo, that's all it took. A single blurry image of Sanders walking off the field, helmet in hand, face unreadable. Within minutes, it was everywhere. ESPN alerts, Twitter feeds, Reddit threads, TikToks with dramatic captions like, "The Browns just imploded." The story wasn't local anymore, it was global. At first, the details were fuzzy. Reporters scrambling for confirmation, insiders rushing to tweet developing story. But the internet doesn't wait for facts, it builds its own truth. Hashtags like Free Shedeur and Stefanski out trended within the hour. One tweet, "You don't send home your franchise QB," passed 1 million views overnight. The fans split instantly. Half of Cleveland backed their young quarterback, calling him passionate, misunderstood, mistreated. The other half defended the coaches, saying discipline matters and no player is bigger than the team. The comment sections turned into war zones. You could see the pattern forming. Influencers dissecting practice footage frame by frame. YouTubers uploading breakdown what really happened with Shedeur Sanders. One TikTok showing his body language leaving the field hit 3 million views in a day. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted a piece of the chaos. Even people who hadn't watched a Browns game in years suddenly cared. Because this wasn't just football anymore. It was drama. It was ego. It was betrayal. Sports talk shows went live before producers could even write segments. ESPN cut into programming for breaking news from Cleveland. Fox Sports ran a full panel debate. Every personality picked a side. Some defended Shedeur, saying this showed leadership, that fire you want from your QB. Former players chimed in. You want your quarterback to care. You want him fighting for his reps. Others called it immaturity, claiming he needed to earn it first. But no one, not one analyst, called it nothing. Everyone knew this was big. Then came the insiders, anonymous sources, league executives, people close to the situation, all feeding different stories. One told Adam Schefter, "This isn't about one bad day. This is about trust, and there's none left in Cleveland." That quote alone lit every sports site on fire. Within hours, talk shifted from a bad practice to who's getting fired first? Stefanski? The GM? Maybe even Sanders himself? The narrative kept twisting, faster than anyone could control.
And that's when the chaos turned nuclear. Because ownership wasn't silent anymore. Jimmy Haslam, furious over how it all looked, reportedly called the front office demanding answers. By Friday morning, the Browns weren't trending because of training camp. They were trending because their franchise was collapsing in real time. Inside team headquarters, phones buzzed non-stop. Reporters at the gates, cameras outside the facility, social media melting down. Every sentence from a coach, every quote from a player, every rumor posted online turned into fuel. The Browns weren't just a football team anymore. They were a soap opera broadcast live across the internet. And Shedeur? He didn't post a word. No statement, no tweets, nothing. His silence said more than anything he could have written. Fans filled in the blanks for him, calling him betrayed, silenced, set up. The narrative spun itself, and by the time the team tried to control it, it was too late. This wasn't a story anymore. It was a movement. And Cleveland, once again, was at the center of another NFL circus. But what the world didn't see, what was really happening inside those walls, was even worse than the headlines. Because behind the scenes, a full-blown power struggle was already unfolding. When word of Shedeur's removal reached the top floor of the Browns facility, it didn't stop with the coaches. It went straight to the man who signs the checks, owner Jimmy Haslam. And from that moment, the situation stopped being about football. It became a power struggle, a battle for control of the Cleveland Browns. Haslam was livid. According to multiple reports, he didn't just call for clarification. He exploded. He'd personally pushed for drafting Shedeur Sanders, publicly called him the future, spent months branding him as the cornerstone of the franchise. And now, his hand-picked quarterback had been sent home from practice by a coach who wasn't even supposed to have that kind of authority. To Haslam, it wasn't just a bad look, it was defiance. Within hours, he was on the phone with General Manager Andrew Berry. Witnesses described the call as heated, filled with demands for explanations and not-so-subtle threats about organizational accountability. Translation: someone's job is on the line. And that someone, at least for now, was Kevin Stefanski. From the coach's side, the story sounded different. Stefanski wasn't angry, he was tired. Tired of walking the tightrope between ownership mandates and locker room respect. Tired of being told who to start, who to promote, who to smile about during press conferences. In his mind, Shedeur's outburst wasn't the issue, it was the symptom of a larger sickness. So, when Haslam demanded answers, Stefanski stood his ground. No apologies, no backtracking, just a clear message. I run this locker room, not the owner, not the media, not the fans. It was bold, it was reckless, and it was career suicide. Inside the building, word spread fast. Executives whispering, assistants avoiding eye contact. You could feel the split forming. Two factions, one loyal to Stefanski's authority, the other to Haslam's power. Berry, the GM, was caught in the middle, trying to broker peace between two men who no longer trusted each other. That night, conference calls ran late, phones buzzed constantly. One insider described the mood as a slow-motion implosion. Haslam wanted Sanders reinstated immediately with a public apology from the coaching staff. Stefanski refused. He wouldn't bend even if it meant his job. He argued discipline mattered more than draft position or PR optics. He said if ownership interfered, it would destroy what little credibility he had left with his players. Haslam didn't care. He saw a coach disrespecting his authority. And in Cleveland, that's never ended well. The irony was brutal. Stefanski, the man once praised for rebuilding stability, was now the face of its destruction. His staff watched nervously as the tug-of-war escalated. Emails leaked, rumors spread. The story had moved beyond sports pages. It was trending on national news feeds, the kind of scandal that makes sponsors nervous and locker rooms unlivable. By Friday morning, the Browns weren't a team anymore. They were two governments locked in civil war. One led by a coach trying to prove he still had control. The other led by an owner trying to prove nobody disobeys him.
Front office meetings became battlegrounds. One source said Barry spent the entire evening running damage control calls, begging both sides to stand down before the organization publicly fractured. But it was already too late. Stefanski's message was defiance. Haslam's was dominance. Neither was willing to blink. And stuck in the middle of it all, the player who started none of it, but carried all of it, Shedeur Sanders. The quarterback who'd gone from being Cleveland's savior to its most dangerous liability. At that point, the question wasn't who was right or wrong, it was who would survive. Because in Cleveland, history doesn't remember who started the fire, only who got burned by it. But while the front office fought for control, something even more dangerous was happening beneath them, inside the locker room itself. While the headlines screamed chaos and the executives played politics, the real damage was happening somewhere quieter, in the locker room. That's where the fallout hit hardest. Because when a team loses trust, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in silence. After Thursday's practice, players shuffled through the facility like ghosts. No music, no laughter, just that strange stillness that settles after something irreversible. Everyone knew what happened, everyone saw it, but no one knew what to say. For some, Shedeur's exit was a gut punch. The guy had worked, really worked. First in, last out, the kind of rookie who watched film during lunch breaks and stayed after drills to throw extra reps. He wasn't entitled, wasn't arrogant, just determined. So when the coaches dismissed him in front of everyone, it didn't feel like discipline, it felt like humiliation. You could feel the shift almost immediately. Receivers, the ones who built chemistry with Shedeur all offseason, went quiet in team meetings. The offensive line, usually the loudest group in the building, barely spoke. Even the veterans, the guys who had seen it all, sat in uncomfortable silence, glancing at each other like soldiers who just witnessed a friendly fire incident. Then came the whispers. Not loud, not public, just quiet side comments in the cafeteria, locker corners, gym hallways. Coach picked his guy. Man, that was foul what they did. Everybody saw that coming. The locker room split in two before anyone realized it. Half the team sided with the coaches, saying rules were rules. You can't confront staff and expect to stay on the field. The other half saw something different. A talented kid finally standing up after weeks of being pushed down. One receiver reportedly told a friend, he didn't lose it, he just got tired of pretending everything was fine. Another veteran lineman put it even simpler. You can't tell players it's a competition, then make sure one guy never wins. The divide wasn't loud, but it was deep. You could see it in meetings. Certain players leaning forward, others checked out. You could feel it during practice. Awkward energy, fake smiles, forced focus. And when the day ended, players didn't hang around to joke or bond. They packed their bags and left. This wasn't a locker room anymore. It was two camps sharing the same space. Stefanski felt it too. You could see it in his posture, the way his voice tightened during press conferences. He tried to keep things professional. We're moving forward. We're focused on football. But inside, he knew. He'd lost them. Not all of them, but enough. Because once players start questioning why decisions are being made, it's over. Discipline stops working. Respect turns conditional. Leadership becomes negotiation. Even the assistants started choosing sides. Some defended Stefanski's authority, saying the team needed order. Others whispered that maybe he'd gone too far, that embarrassing your rookie quarterback in front of the team was a line you don't cross. Meanwhile, Shedeur stayed silent. No interviews, no statements, no cryptic posts. But silence can be powerful, and his silence said everything. Every day he stayed quiet, his teammates grew louder in private. His absence became the loudest voice in the building.
By the end of the week, Cleveland wasn't practicing together, it was performing. Every drill, every huddle, every snap felt staged, as if everyone was pretending this was still a team. But deep down, they all knew. The Browns had fractured. Fear replaced loyalty. Self-preservation replaced teamwork. And every player knew exactly what that meant. In Cleveland,
You don't pick sides publicly, because sooner or later, the wrong side gets cut. This was no longer a quarterback controversy. It was an identity crisis. And for Shedeur Sanders, that crisis was about to redefine who he really was, not as a player, but as a man under fire. Strip away the headlines, the hashtags, and the chaos, and you're left with one truth. This was never just about football. It was about a young man fighting to define himself in a shadow that's almost impossible to escape. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't grow up like other quarterbacks. He was raised in locker rooms. He learned pressure before he learned patience. While most kids were throwing passes in backyards, Shedeur was watching film with his father, Deion Sanders, one of the greatest athletes the game has ever known. And that's both his superpower and his curse. From the moment Shedeur picked up a football, the comparisons started. The expectations weren't fair, they were inherited. Every touchdown was Deion's son shining. Every mistake was Deion's son disappointing. Even in college, at Colorado, when he was rewriting record books and lighting up defenses, critics called him privileged, spoiled, riding a legacy. What they never saw were the hours no one filmed, the late nights studying plays, the 4 a.m. workouts, the quiet obsession with proving that his name wasn't a gift, it was a target. That's the mindset he brought to Cleveland, the hunger to outwork everyone, to silence the noise. He walked into training camp with the same confidence that carried him through college, smile sharp, voice calm, eyes locked. He wasn't looking for handouts. He was looking for a fair fight. But what happens when you realize the fight is rigged? Imagine showing up early every day, running extra drills, nailing the playbook down to the comma, and still being told you're not ready. Imagine doing everything right and still feeling like you're one rep away from being forgotten. That's not immaturity, that's frustration. That's a competitor being boxed in by politics disguised as professionalism. People love to label moments like Thursday's meltdown as emotional, but the truth is, emotion doesn't erupt from nowhere. It builds, it stacks, one slight at a time, one ignored question at a time, one empty promise at a time. And for Shedeur, that explosion wasn't a tantrum, it was a statement. For months, he'd swallowed his pride, played by their rules, trusted their process. And what did it get him? Benched reps, media scrutiny, a staff that smiled in front of cameras and shut doors behind him. So when he finally snapped, it wasn't about defiance. It was about self-respect. Sources close to him described that day not as a breakdown, but as a breaking point. One teammate said, "He's been quiet for too long. They pushed him into that corner. What they expect him to do? Just keep taking it?" Even those who disagreed with how it went down couldn't deny what drove it, the relentless pressure of being Deion Sanders in a league that doesn't care who your father is, only how fast you deliver results. Because when you carry that last name, every mistake becomes a headline. Every silence becomes a statement. Every moment, even walking off a practice field, becomes a national story. And through it all, Shedeur never pointed fingers, never went online to defend himself, never leaked his side. That's not arrogance, that's discipline. That's the same stoic control he learned watching his father take hits, critics, and headlines, and keep walking forward. People forget, Deion raised his sons to be fighters, not favorites. And Shedeur, for all the spotlight and privilege people accuse him of, has always been fighting for something deeper. Not fame, not approval, but respect.
He doesn't want to be Deion's kid. He wants to be the quarterback who made his own legacy, his own name, his own mark. And that's what makes this moment so powerful, because for the first time in his career, Shedeur Sanders wasn't just playing football, he was standing up for himself. That day on the practice field, when he turned and walked away, wasn't weakness, it was rebellion. It was a message to everyone watching. I won't be used. I won't be silenced. I'm not just a name on your depth chart. He didn't just walk off the field, he walked into a new chapter, one that could either destroy his career or define it forever.
But while Shedeur found his voice, Cleveland was still losing theirs, because the chaos inside the organization was far from over, and the next decisions would determine whether anyone in that building still had control. By Friday morning, Cleveland wasn't talking about football anymore. It was talking about survival. The practice field had become ground zero, and the ripple effects were everywhere. In meeting rooms, in press conferences, in the quiet corners of a fractured franchise, trying to pretend everything was fine. But everyone knew nothing was fine. The Browns had reached a point no team wants to reach, a moment where every decision feels like a mistake waiting to happen. Do you punish your future quarterback to protect your head coach's authority? Or do you side with the player knowing it might destroy your locker room? There were no right answers left, only consequences. Inside the facility, phones buzzed with updates that sounded more like ultimatums. Haslam wanted resolution, Stefanski wanted order, the GM wanted calm. But what they really needed was control, and nobody had that anymore. 4 options sat on the table, 4 paths that could change everything. Option 1, reinstate Shedeur immediately. Bring him back with a statement of unity, issue a vague miscommunication excuse, and pretend the whole thing never happened. But that would mean Stefanski admitting he'd overreacted. It would mean ownership forcing a public apology from their own staff. In other words, impossible. Option 2, let him return quietly. No apology, no press, just back to work. That might have worked if the internet hadn't already turned this into a circus. Now, silence wasn't professionalism, it was weakness. Every press question would be a landmine, every camera angle a reminder. The story wouldn't fade, it would grow. Option 3, trade him. End the drama, cut the cord, send him somewhere else, fast. But that meant telling fans we quit. It meant admitting that the so-called savior of Cleveland barely lasted 1 training camp. And worse, it meant giving up on the quarterback the owner had ever truly believed in. Option 4, fire Stefanski. Start over, again. A new coach, a new direction, another chapter in Cleveland's endless self-destruction. But that move would come with its own poison, because what head coach in the league would ever want this job, knowing the owner runs the show and the players run the headlines? 4 doors, every one of them locked from the inside. And through it all, the players kept showing up, physically at least. They ran drills, watched film, went through the motions. But anyone watching closely could see the truth. The Browns weren't preparing for a season anymore. They were surviving a scandal.
Outside the building, fans argued nonstop. Talk shows turned the incident into free-for-all content. TikToks analyzing Shedeur's body language hit millions of views. Reddit threads mapped conspiracy theories about which coach leaked the story. Cleveland had become entertainment. And in the NFL, once you become entertainment, you stop being respected. But somewhere inside that storm, something deeper was happening. Shedeur wasn't broken, he was sharpening. People close to him said he was watching film harder than ever, training like a man possessed, quiet, focused, waiting. He wasn't thinking about apologies or politics, he was thinking about redemption. Because the same fire that caused his meltdown was the same fire that built his career. Meanwhile, Stefanski faced a truth every coach eventually learns. Once you lose the locker room, you never get it back. His voice, once respected, had become background noise. Every speech sounded defensive, every command felt hollow. The players weren't rebelling, they were just done. And Haslam? He had a choice to make: keep the coach and lose the player, or back the player and risk another coaching change. Either way, Cleveland was back where it always ends up, rebuilding chaos and calling it culture. By the weekend, reporters described the facility as tense, quiet, and fragile. Nobody trusted anybody, not the players, not the coaches, not the front office. Everyone was waiting for the first domino to fall. But the truth is,
it already had. Because the moment Shedeur Sanders was told to leave that field, the Browns crossed an invisible line, from dysfunction into disaster, from internal tension into full-blown fracture, from football team into case study. Every season has a storyline. This one won't be remembered for touchdowns or highlights. It'll be remembered for how it all unraveled, for how a team with everything somehow lost everyone. And somewhere out there, Shedeur's silence still speaks louder than any statement the organization could make. Because this wasn't just a practice gone wrong. It was a warning. A mirror held up to every franchise built on ego instead of alignment. In the NFL, talent wins games, but unity wins seasons. In Cleveland, they've got the first. They just destroyed the second. So now the question isn't what happened that day. It's what happens next. Because Thursday's explosion wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the reckoning.